Coogs House. Texas Tech is coming to Houston this week, bringing Shiel Wood with them. Defensive coordinator just got there from the University of Houston, and no one knows his weaknesses better than the Cougars.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, the podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate you making your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. We're doing the conversation, but you don't know what to say. Tell us in the comments down below. When it comes to fajitas, we're talking about things that involve tortillas all week. We're playing Texas Tech this Saturday. When it comes to fajitas, beef, chicken, combo, something else, what do you get in yours? Tell us in the comments down below. Today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at Game Time. We got more on that fun later, but I want to talk about a lot of things in this episode about this matchup. First, I'll look at Shiel Wood, defensive coordinator, returning to Houston and what that could mean in a lot of different areas of this football game. Second, I think there's an advantage Houston has against that Shielwood defense. I want to talk about and kind of start the interrogation of that as far as I'm at this point in it. And then I also have to be honest and talk about one big strength that that defense has and how Houston can work to minimize that problem. But first, foremost, Shielwood coming back to Houston. Now, you remember Shielwood left for the Texas Tech Red Raiders last offseason, early in the offseason, November, early in the offseason, relatively swiftly. It kind of took a lot of people by surprise. Houston was already looking to replace their offensive coordinator after firing their offensive coordinator towards the end of the season. And Shielwood kind of just got up and left Houston to go to Texas Tech very suddenly. When asked about it, Willie Fritz indicated there was a money issue. Now, Shielwood took the money and ran. Power to him, not upset about it. Go get your money, Bobo. But I will say it sounded like one of the indications. It was implied, not explicitly said. I should stress that part. Implied, not explicitly said, that yes, Shielwood was getting paid $750,000 at Houston and is getting $1.2 million at Texas Tech. These are publicly available numbers, public schools publishing the records, right, et cetera. That's a big gap. Totally get that. The implication of the exit and certainly the implication of the people in and around the Houston program was it didn't sound like there's a whole lot of realistic timetables or realistic thought to can Houston get close or match, right? There wasn't a whole lot of that kind of consideration given. I think that's part of the reason it took everyone by surprise. And like I said, hey, they're offering me this much money. What can we talk about? It was none of that. It was take it and go. And I do think that rubbed a lot of people not so great. Shielwood obviously ran a great defense at Houston. Thankful for that. And again, I'm not going to be upset with someone about going out and getting their money. That's not at all what happened or happens, really. I mean, this is at the end of the day a way to feed your family, and that's a lot of money to do that. But I will say that it was interesting to me that on Monday in the Texas Tech media availability, they do their weekly presser just like Willie Fritz does. And he commented several times in very stoned face, kind of no emotion, not going to talk about it. As how quick can we get to the next question kind of verbiage about his time in Houston. He was asked about it. He said about what he enjoyed, what he missed, or something to that effect. And he said, quote, I've enjoyed every place I've worked. I've learned from every experience I've had. And then when pushed a little bit more, he said, I think you learn from every coach that you work with. My last stop was no exception to that. Didn't want to elaborate. And he, if anything, Joey McGuire said more when head coach Joey McGuire at Texas Tech said that, quote, he poked the bear and then told defensive coordinator Shielwood to, quote, let's not make it about you, right? And his return to Houston this weekend. And that's fascinating to me. Look, Shielwood is a career climber. It should have been known when he came to Houston. They probably wouldn't be around very long. Since 2017, with various titles, Texas Tech is already his 8th school. Only Army had him for more than 2 seasons, or for 2 seasons in that window of time. And it bears mentioning that even within that Army stint, he actually changed titles in his 2 seasons from one year to the next, changing what position group he worked with specifically. Prior to 2017, he had about a decade of experience at Wofford, which was his alma mater, totally different. But since then, it seems to be 1 year at each place. Should also be mentioned that, while it's 1 year at each place, his first year at Tulane was Willie Fritz's last year. He then came to Houston from Tulane with Fritz. And so there's something to be said about like that staff had a lot of guys up and leave to come to Houston from Tulane, right? And so that didn't feel quite the same. I think is why it was such a shock to the system when he uh, left a year later. Now, I look at his time in Houston and think, Houston did have a top 30 defense. It was great. He's got a great defense up there in Tech. That costs a lot of money, right? All that. But Fritz knows as well as anyone the best ways to counteract this opponent, right? He also, for its worth, has a lot of his same assistant coaches. I think it speaks volumes that, look, Houston lost a couple of major portal guys over the offseason. Defensive backs, the weakness we'll talk about in a second of the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Houston lost 3, but 2 that played for Wood that are like some of the best in the country. They went to big dollar programs. They didn't go to Tech, didn't look at Tech, right? A bunch of defensive assistants. Houston lost a defensive assistant that was here working with Shiel Wood to Miami, notably not Texas Tech, right? Like, I think it's worth looking at that. Like when Shiel Wood got up and left Houston to go to Texas Tech, there wasn't a flood of people that would have had the option to go with him that were going with him. If you're Jeremiah Wilson, you can play at Florida State. If you were AJ Halsey, you can play at LSU. If you were Zach Etheridge, you can coach at Miami. You could have done all of those exact same jobs in Lubbock. Ain't no shame, right? And they didn't want to go do that. Interesting thing to note there, right? I also think it's worth pointing out that, like, I don't mean to say that people have figured out the Houston defense by the end of the year, because I don't think so. But at the end of the year, yes, against Baylor, Jeremiah Wilson, the aforementioned Jeremiah Wilson, now with Florida State Seminole, had 2 big takeaways in the game, 2 picks. One was a touchdown. The other one probably should have been, right? Got tackled by his own guy, actually, in the course of catching the football there. Would have had a breakaway. That's great. They also gave up 165 yards rushing, and kind of felt like Baylor found some stuff. Baylor was missing one of their two, I don't want to say it's like 1A, 1B kind of running backs. I don't know which one you officially call the starter. They were missing one. It didn't seem to matter. 165 yards on the ground. BYU similar with a running quarterback in Jake Retzloff, a different kind of running quarterback, but an active athletic quarterback. Put up 194. BYU as a team put up 194 yards rushing against Houston. Retzloff had 62 of that 194. I think it's worth mentioning, like, if Houston wants to find ways to score points on the Shielwood defense with an athletic quarterback, or maybe not the same kind of running game or whatever, like, they can just pull up the tape from a year ago, and those defensive assistants were all on the staff and saw it happen up close and in person. Because one of the interesting things about this Austin Armstrong deal coming in is he didn't replace a bunch of the assistants, right? Still got JCY, still got Giles, like, still got a bunch of the core of the staff. And that offers interesting insight. I'm not saying they're swapping notes to the offense. Both groups have to, like, be paying attention. But I'm also not saying that they're not helping each other out in this process either, right? The goal is to win the football game. And if someone knows Shiel Wood well enough to exploit the weaknesses of his system as a coordinator, it's going to be Willie Fritz, the only head coach he's worked under for 2 consecutive seasons since 2017. It's going to be these assistants that just worked with him a year ago. It's going to be all of these things. And I understand that more has to go right to win the football game on Saturday than just schematically having an advantage over the. I get that, totally get it, totally understand. It takes all 22 players. It takes a lot of things going on. I'm just pointing out that the stone-faced Shiel Wood and the presser on Monday probably is there to cover up some things that, let's be honest, might be worth worrying about. if you're Shielwood and the Texas Tech Red Raiders. If there is one program in the Big 12 ready to take advantage of these things schematically, it's going to be Houston. Now, is that why Houston went super vanilla and bland in the first couple of weeks of the season? I don't know if I'd go that far. I'd hear it though. Are you going to tell me that maybe that's why you waited till Colorado to really show off what Connor Wegman could do running the football as a quarterback? You know, maybe you got there and realized you kind of had to do it to win the football game, right? Like maybe those things did play a role, or maybe there are things you're realizing you can do better as you go on, and you still know. And looking at what Houston and Shielwood were able to do last year and what they struggled with last year, right? You can see kind of where they were going. Now, I will say, Shielwood has an expensive roster up there in Lubbock. Like there's a lot of talent on that thing, and I am not one to hate programs for spending money. That's the game now. Kudos, right? But I do think there's a group that Houston has an advantage in, at least in terms of like one side of the ball versus the other, and it involves Shielwood's defense as well. And I want to talk about that in 1 second. But before we get too far, today's show is brought to you by our buddies at Quo. Now, one of the tools that help make a huge difference for business owners is Quo, formerly Open Phone. It's the same great business phone system you've heard me talk about before, just with a new name. Now, here's why that matters. Every missed call is money left on the table. When every customer conversation counts, you need a phone system that keeps you connected 24/7. Quo is the number one business phone system that streamlines customer communications. It works right through an app on your phone or computer. There's no more carrying two phones or relying on landline, etc. Listen, everyone's been the customer in this situation. You call in one place, they don't answer, you just call the next, and you're just going with whoever talks to you first. With Quo, you get responses out to your customers faster. See why over 90,000 businesses trust Quo, formerly Open Phone. Get started free and get 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/locked on colleges. Quo, QUO.com/locked on college. And if you got existing numbers, other services, Quo will port them over at no extra charge. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. Park Rangers locked on Coogs here. Look, this Texas Tech roster, top to bottom, offense, defense, is expensive. And we're going to admit that throughout the week, to be honest, because we can't not admit that when we look at the rosters here. Houston is building a program up, rebuilding a program after being not in the Power 4 or Power 5 for so long. And I'd say they're ahead of schedule. Texas Tech having resources from that same window where they were in the Power 5 is kind of finding their footing in this NIL modern football game. I get that. However, while that is the like dollars and cents of it all, I do think Houston's got a major advantage in one area I want to talk about today. I think they got a couple other advantages too to talk about throughout the week. But in this specific spot, I think Houston's wide receivers, including the tight end, are a big advantage versus the Texas Tech secondary. I would argue in watching a couple of Tech games, the Oregon State game and the Utah game, that the secondary is the weakest part of Tech's roster. It's not that it's not good or whatever, that it just sticks out as being dramatically different. It feels like a letdown relative to the rest of the guys they've got. Houston, on the other hand, had a different lead in receptions 3 consecutive weeks. It's hard as a wide receiver core, when you include the tight end especially, to like fixate on any one person. Frankly, the guy most teams are fixating on is tight end Tanner Kochel, just because he's kind of the most awkward and difficult matchup at 6'8", 250. He necessitates like at least two guys on him a lot of the game as a tight end that can split out, split off ball, but can also line up in line and fit inside and block and stuff like that. Like he changes how that all works. So I'd imagine that's the guy to key up on. But honestly, we saw last week Amari Thomas come in, get 100 yards, make a big difference, right? The week before, Boogie Johnson led the team in catches, had his own big plays as well. Boogie seems to be coming alive too. He started off with a touchdown catch in the end of the game against Rice to finally get on the board. Then he had led the team in receptions against Colorado, had the big reception late against Oregon State for the touchdown. He seems to be coming along, and frankly, it would also be very Houston if it was just somebody else we haven't heard of yet this year. Is this the game that you finally have Kobe Young connect on a couple of those deep shots? Because they've taken a shot or two deep to Kobe several different times this season and most of the games they've played, and there's just something not quite connected. It's just a little overthrown or a little through his fingers, or this one's a drop. And like the Oregon State bomb that they threw, he catches it and he's falling down as he's catching it, and the ball just like pops into like there's an injury. I couldn't quite tell how serious it was as he's trying to catch it, and the ball pops out. He's rolling around the ground afterwards for an incomplete pass. Like, you're centimeters and inches away from having some of those happen. Is it the week those click? Because now it's game 5. You've got enough time on task with those. Is it Harvey Broussard, who heard about a lot this summer, a really strong transfer recruit coming in, right? Is it back to Mekhi Muse, who had the gigantic Kansas game a year ago as a scatty guy? We saw Joe McGuire mention him in watching that Tech presser. Joe McGuire mentioned Mekhi Muse as a difference maker in a special teams kind of way. Can you get him the ball in screen kind of situations and create the same kind of advantage in normal football plays, right? All of that is to say that, like, I look at what Derek Sherman, the wide receiver coach, has in front of him and think he has big advantages here and some playmakers. Obviously, a big part of it is that Connor Wegman can sling the football around a bit, and we're learning more and more each week that he's getting more and more comfortable. But I like what Sherman did last game. He's got so much talent in that wide receiver room that after a Kobe Young drop and a Stephon Boogie Johnson drop, he won a series or two without those guys in the game. As great as they are, as much as they're starters on this football team, he went with Amari Thomas. He went with Mekhi Muse. He went with Harvey Broussard. And Amari Thomas ended up changing the game because of it, right? And I think that that's a strength for this team against Texas Tech. Now, schematically, right, they can expect the same kind of stuff, frankly, that they saw in practice last year against Shiel Wood. But I think that the talent advantage is actually one of the spots here where Houston's got one. And I think what you'll probably see is um, Bryce Pollock trying to track Boogie Johnson. Pollock is their best defensive back per Pro Football Focus. He's also an outside corner. I didn't, and watching the Oregon State and Utah games, necessarily see a whole lot of difference between the two, but I'll take that he's a little bit better than his counterpart. So I imagine Pollock tries to track Boogie Johnson or whoever you want to call Houston's number one, and we'll kind of figure that out by who they identify, because Pollock does change sides of the field, it looks like, over the course of the football game. The safety slash slot guy I think they'll put on Kogel is John Curry, who's 6'2", 235 as a safety, but plays a lot down inside of 8-10 yards in a way that feels more like a nickel, but he's built like a safety, right? I think he'll probably try and play really physical with Tanner. And the deal with Tanner is, like, with Kogel, it's not that he gets great separation necessarily. He's not an elusive route runner in that way, but it is like his catch radius, his length, his hands. He's just open a lot by existing in the right space. There's like box outs and shields and those kinds of things that just work. Right now, I think this is a big difference for Houston in this game, and I think the big thing for Houston is going to be finding ways to quick execution. Open up Amari Thomas on that quick dig right over the middle for a first down, or get the deep comeback out of Stephon Johnson, or to frankly get Harvey Broussard more involved in the quick slant game, or those kinds of actions here, right? I'd also fully expect Houston to take 3 shots in this game, 3, maybe even 4. Now, that's a little unique given the situation. Houston's been much more of a ball controlled team. I don't think they're going to go to a lot of the fastball or tempo-y kind of stuff as a base ever. But in this game, I do think with the success you saw against Oregon State at the end, you might see it like once a quarter or twice a half, maybe, to kind of make sure it keeps Tech on their toes. And in that kind of way, I could see like that involving more of these wideouts, more of these receivers, and so on. Now, as much as I want to get the wide receivers involved, because I think that is Houston's big advantage in this game, that all relies on minimizing one big glaring problem in this game. And I want to talk about that problem in a second. Before we get too far, today's show is brought to you by our buddies at FanDuel, America's #1 sports, because the NFL season is here. Someone finally told those Houston Texans that it's here. FanDuel has offers that you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you unlock $300 to bet and use across the app. Now, that's in-game, pre-game, parlays, props, money lines, anything you're looking at. FanDuel is the place to look for it. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Parker Andrews locked on Coogs here. And look, I do think, and I will continue to think, that Houston has an advantage in their wide receivers versus the Tech secondary. Okay. We'll probably mention that a couple times. I'll probably mention it to Case Cowan and Chris Level when we talk to them this week. I think that that's a spot that Houston can take advantage of. I will also admit that taking advantage of that will require your offensive line to play at a level they haven't played yet this year. And the Texas Tech defensive line is kind of their best unit. If their secondary is their worst unit, at least on the defense side of the ball, their defensive line might be their best unit on the entire team. Now, to keep the defensive line from just pinning the airbacks and running, you're going to have to get some push and keep them honest running the football, right? That might mean you have some of those 1-2 yard runs. Just kind of make sure they know that you're going to run the football every so often, right? That's part of the long game, the chess game that is coaching football game, right? But you got to find some ways to take the defensive line out of the game. That's moving the pocket, off platform throws. Connor Wegman has shown before he can do those kinds of things. So do you roll those things out in a more organized manner in this one? Maybe. Look, part of this is also that Houston's offensive line has already gotten some battered and bruised to it, right? You got Alvin Ibiseli playing most of last week on what was a very heavily taped ankle. A week later, hopefully that thing's all right, but that was the case. Dalton Merriman was back, but he missed games injured this season on the injury report, right? So hopefully with time and the extra rest day because you played on Friday, those guys are feeling better this week. But and I would stress that Dalton Merriman moving to right tackle from left tackle at Tech a year ago has done wonders for his career. But both of those guys kind of need that extra day of rest, and really we're hoping for the healing process to continue through them before we get to Saturday. You also have David Duque out for the season. He'd probably be on track to play 50-55 snaps this Saturday. It was starting rotational. However, he's not going to suit. I mean, he's not suit the rest of the year. He's hurt, so you suddenly don't have that. Where Jason Rooks, your guard, shows up in the injury report will be interesting to see as well, because they got a couple edge rushers at Tech that are two of the best ones Houston's going to see this year. I don't want to sugarcoat this or make this less than, or like, Romello Height and David Bailey are two of the best pass rushers Houston's going to see this year. They are. I think they're both pros. Romello Height is 6'3", 240 pounds, and David Bailey is 6'3", 250. Height's a little bit older. He played at Georgia Tech, USC, and then before that, Auburn for a brief stint. He was high school class 2020. Old guy. David Bailey has been at Stanford the last 3 seasons, and both are 2-point stance pass rusher types that manage to stay low and still pack a good punch. With good leverage, even out of that 2-point stance, which generally means speed, which at 240 and 250 respectively is impressive out of Romello and Height. I mean, these are their 2 different edge guys. You can't like pick one to run away. They're both really good. Now, I think they're both NFL guys, but I don't think that makes them infallible. Like, they're not like, oh my gosh, this is Ed Oliver, right? They're not doing that to Houston or anything like that. First of all, because I guess Ed Oliver would be doing that to Houston at practice, but I do think they're really good. I think that what's interesting in watching them is they're so strong. They tend to rush down the middle of tackles a lot. And if you're teaching defensive line technique, you talk about half a man, rush half man. The bull rush thing is kind of it's interesting when it's your like Colin Carter go-to pass rush move to use a bull rush. That generally implies a level of finesse that I would argue Romello Height and David Bailey both have more than. But not my guys. They rush down the middle of the guys a lot. They rush really wide angles a lot to try and get those sacks and pressures. That can open up big lanes between them and the interior defensive tackle. And they do fall into that gap a lot as well. But I would argue that's actually staying undisciplined in the rush lanes. And on a air quotes bad ankle, Devin Dampier is able to scramble around and find a lot of time to throw the football versus them. Now, do I think Devin Dampier had a bum ankle? No. Do I think Connor Wegman's a better athlete than people realize and can do some of that stuff too? Yeah, I do. And I think that those are the ways that you negate this. You move the pocket, you get chips and double teams from your tight ends and running backs before they get into routes. You rely on Wigman to trust some instincts and say, hey, if that second read open, you might not have the time to get to the third. You got to chuck it and go, bud. Like those kinds of moments, I think, are we're going to see things happening here for Houston. It is an advantage for them. And the biggest thing I think that for Houston is as much of an advantage that Houston has in that secondary versus or Houston wide receiver versus the Texas Tech secondary, that secondary benefits a lot from this pass rush, right? Less time to throw means less time to cover. Less time to cover means less options in the routes, and you can jump things a lot differently, right? Now, I don't think it's impossible for Houston to pick this kind of pass rush up. And frankly, we saw an offensive line that had more problems last year play against strong defensive lines at Kansas State or hosting Kansas State and at TCU, right? We saw him put it up and we saw him win the football game in spite of it, right? Both of those games, the quarterback running was a big part of it. I don't know how much design run we'll see from Connor Wegman. I'd imagine it's some, especially given like the success other teams have had with that against some of the stuff Tech does. I think the real trick, though, is the improvisational kind of things that a mobile quarterback can offer you in this one. Going to be a big deal for Houston, big deal for the Cougs, and trying to take down Texas Tech. Because Texas Tech, let's be honest, stands at the top of the conference right now. And there's no way around it. They stand at the top of the conference right now. They have the biggest conference win of any of the undefeated conference teams in terms of beating ranked opponents, whatever, on paper, right? You don't play every game on paper, but I think that's where they're at. And so Houston's got a chance to take that down this Saturday. And I think they got a better chance than people realize. The spread is still over double digits. I told you on Monday, I continue. I think it's going to stay on over double digits all week long. And that's just what Vegas is. And that's okay. Right now, when we talk about this game throughout the week, each and every day here at Locked On Cougs, we're going to do some fun stuff for this one to make sure you want to hit subscribe and hit the bell so you know when we go live. If you're looking for a second listen of the day, Locked On Big 12, ton of fun happening over there. Locked On College Basketball, as commits are starting to pick up in the basketball world, make sure you go check them out as well. And if you want some insight on the opponent, Locked On Texas Tech, Chris Level, Case Cowan do a great job. Whatever you think about the Raiders, those two dudes are two good dudes talking about it the right kind of way. Locked On Cougs, the primary Locked On podcast network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.